It will be,
So
sorry, it's just starting now. I apologize, I didn't think to start
So
recording.
Kesra, maybe just for Lisa's benefit, I think the idea was to take the Office of Personnel Management maturity questions and then supplement them with others to address the maturity layers and
Yeah,
categories and statements that we had.
yeah, and that's something Perijan and I had talked about too. We basically just pulled in what we currently have, and so you can go either way. Say, okay, let's have the questions aligned with the maturity statement, or have changed the maturity statement a little bit based on some of the questions, right? That's all something that we need to work through. This provided us a mechanism, A, to kind of figure out where the overlaps are with org culture and workforce, and B, that some of the questions that we had already have, whether they belong, or whether we can move them between the categories. So in this case, like, definitely workforce should have a training and education development section, but there's some questions that we have under org culture that we feel may belong under workforce, and then there's one under org that under workforce that may belong somewhere in org culture. So this just makes it, and just puts it into more manageable chunks, and be able to see sort of where the overlaps are, and then make sure that the questions also, if we have the same question in both categories, whether they should be that's okay, or whether it should be in one or the other. And so we pretty much did that. Haven't done anything with communication because we didn't really have much there yet. Employee empowerment. Again, did the same thing. There were no questions yet, but the idea was that there might be some overlap in the maturity statements or in the questions. And then, performance, again, Parijat worked really hard on these. So these just pulls them in, and then there's nothing to say that, once Lisa and Makeda start looking at it and they say, no, we don't think that this, workforce really belongs in this performance category. It should be moved someplace else. But this just helped us align more things together and be able to see them all. And then eventually we can combine them all into one. But this just is like a working process that we thought might help us.
So you combined the categories within layers then into, you consolidated those? Yeah.
Yeah, so they're basically done this way, right? So we've kept the workforce separate. We haven't combined anything as such. Just on the tabs we've listed, here's what workforce has, and here's what organizational culture has, so that on one page we can see if there are any overlaps. Like, for example, competency and engagement, there's training, education, development. We kept the workforce piece separate. We didn't include it in our org culture, but this lays it out where, Lisa and Makeda and all of you guys can go in here and say, well, yeah, some of these questions that we have in org culture, yeah, they belong in org culture, but this one really should be under the workforce. And then some you might find, let's just zap this all together out of org culture, and then we should only need it in the workforce. But this at least gives us some manageable chunks to look at.
This is Sean. I think this is fabulous. The three of us had a call, I think, last week. I think it'll be really helpful to, for example, show this line 14, which is that then says a question, I'm given a real opportunity to improve my skills in my organization. So then although it's currently under organizational culture, the green WKF means that it probably something that pertains more to workforce. And if you look at line 5, learning/growth is a core value of organization, although it's currently on the workforce side, it most likely would become more of an issue of the organization. So Kaysar has been thinking about this a lot, and Parijat as well. So I just wanted to kind of highlight these two examples to show how they sorted and how they kind of helped keep everything, but provide a structure for us to discuss it.
And Lisa, I think that what we were looking at is imagining how our utility is going to actually use this, and most likely they would combine them together in a survey in terms of these questions to work on to assess their maturity. But it enables you to break them out by workforce and org culture if you want to.
Sure. I'm going to hop in. I got a couple comments, and I'm not putting my camera on because for some reason I'm having a little bit of a bandwidth issue, I guess, today. In fact, if possible, I'll try and share my screen briefly. I think that this is excellent work, but I want to, something keeps popping into my thinking about this, and I think it actually addresses see, are you seeing the table of applying systems thinking?
Yep.
So we've had this, how do we distinguish culture from workforce? Well, you really can't totally, because workforce is, there are systems within workforce that are part of that overall culture. So I think if we can think about workforce, what are the systems that we are and processes that we consider to be part of our workforce domain of work, then we can accept the fact that that's going to be that's contributing to culture. And we won't be able to totally distinguish those apart from each other. But I think what's key is I look at this great information we've put together, and we have a lot of statements that talk about how the employees will be doing and what their behaviors are, right? I don't know that if we've captured enough, what is the mindset and the thinking and the behaviors of the leaders to bring about that change? And I know there's some in there, but it's almost like we need category of the leader's mindset and types of behaviors that drive the rest of this, because that's where it starts, the individual mindsets of the leaders, and then their resulting behaviors and what they support and set up for systems and processes, ultimately what gives us what we have. So if I can use an example, we talk about employee empowerment or growth. If the servant leader doesn't believe that there's intrinsic value in helping all members of the organization grow and develop, and believe that they can improve and get better, especially when it comes to leadership skills. Lots of times people think, oh, you got to hire them with it because you can't grow it. Well, that's going to create a problem in your future of your organization. If you have leaders thinking that, they're not going to use that development program in the way that you need them to support the organization. So it's just another way to kind of call out, where do we have the important critical starting point is the leader mindset towards this kind of system approach.
Yeah. One
it's
thing,
interesting
Lisa,
you say that. Oh, I'm sorry, Scott.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in case you might have, additional comments. But one thing that we also talked about is when we look at maturity and then we look at assessment, part of the assessment, there's probably a front end piece where you have some demographics. So you can identify as a category at least what is in different levels in the organization. So you're dealing with the organization as a whole, you're dealing with leaders, you're dealing with employees, and you're able to break out what the responses to those questions are, for those different groups to see where the problems are to address. That was one technique. Anyway, which actually supports what you're saying.
So this is Cello. I just wanted to show this is actually the list from Office of Personnel Management, and they do have a whole section that deals with leadership because it starts with my work experience, then it's my work unit, my agency or organization, my supervisor, my leadership, and then my satisfaction, and then it's performance. So Lisa, there is, if we use these as a reference, we don't have to use them as they are. There is a section that deals with it. So Scott mentioned one aspect of it is that we have demographics that show where the answer comes from, but we also have the structure reflected in the questions as well. So,
Thanks. That's good.
Kaysar, you're on mute.
Yeah, one thing, Cello, that and Kasra, that we may or may not have included specifically would be, what are desirable behaviors and that kind of thing, and whether that becomes an artifact or it's integrated in with the questions, is a question. But, we could definitely give more visibility to what some desirable behaviors are versus what some undesirable behaviors, would be as well.
They could be reflected in the maturity model where you define levels in terms of, if they're desirable or not. And the assessment method would then need to assist you in knowing where you are on this. And then the artifacts that you mentioned would be very helpful if you actually want to make a change.
Yeah, and right, and absolutely, your graphic, Lisa. I mean, it's right on in terms of what good is it going to do for the organization if the staff, let's say, has one point of view and then the leaders have a different one, and you're not dealing with the underlying issues and assumptions in terms of expectations and how the organization is going to operate. So, those are definitely key issues to address.
So I guess the feedback, I think that Kaysar and I mean, everybody contributed to these beautiful spreadsheets. I think they're tremendous. It was Makeda and Alice and Kaysar provided the original structure. So this is kind of building on what different people have contributed. So it reflects, I think, different perspectives and experience and so forth. So I think this core team has done a tremendous job. Everybody's building on, other people's. It's almost to me like a jazz band, and then everybody takes a solo at a time. So we have a couple of 3 months to get this stuff solidified, but we're really on a good track, I think, to have a solid maturity model and very decent assessment method. Now, so one thing that I see that we would need to do is kind of solidify and put a bow and wrap up this version 1.0 of both the maturity model and the assessment method, and then decide, do we want to have them separately? Do we want to have them together? Do we want to have a menu that we provide to people and say, these are, we say, this is a list of questions related to workforce. This is the list of questions related to organizational culture. And you can give them a tool to construct a survey. And there are benefits and drawbacks to every approach, to each of these approaches, because if we send people 100 questions that are complicated, their desire and willingness to participate goes down. If we send them 5 questions that are very simple, everybody's going to respond, but we're not going to be able to analyze it and make sense. What does it really mean? Mm-hmm. So there's and somebody might want to do a targeted survey to look at a specific aspect of it. So I think this reminds me at the end of a movie, Casablanca, when they walk and say, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. But I think this is a beginning of a beautiful partnership. And this core team, I think, has done tremendous job. So I'm very happy. But
Well,
there are some decisions we'll need to make fairly soon in terms of pruning this, in terms of deciding how to structure it, in terms of kind of packaging it up, and then linking it to change management, because we would like this assessment to produce something that will be helpful for people who are actually trying to make changes. So I'll shut up now and I'll listen for other thoughts.
So I think, Cello, along the lines of what you just talked about, when Parijat and I were working on this and grouping them, the idea was that we're just grouping them by things that seem like the concepts that fit together. And so it'll help us come up with our questions, assessment questions, because we're looking across the board. You know, what would workforce need? What belongs to organizational culture? But by no means what we've put together is our thoughts. So, you know, if everyone can look at it and say, no, this really doesn't belong here, this should be on its own, or however, or it belongs someplace else. And then if we develop the questions based on the framework that we have here, that will at least give us review of what our maturity 5-level statements look like and the questions that go with it. And then after that, we can then sort of decide, let's take all the workforce ones, separate them out, or culture, separate them out, and then decide on how do we want to present this to other utilities to say, if you just want to measure your workforce, look at these questions, you know, and if you want to just assess your org culture, you know, look at these questions. And then, you know, you can kind of make those decisions after I think we've put this together.
I don't know, Mark might even want to jump in here, but what you did, I mean, you don't necessarily want to say over here on one side is workforce and over here is organizational culture. You might want to show them together and then just indicate what the main, who the main audience is, maybe.
Right.
You know, something like that, which you did, you know. I mean, you're working away at that, you know, which ones are workforce and which one. So you kind of show them together because people, I think as we've talked about before, are going to cherry pick off of this and they're going to, you know, reduce it from 100 questions to something more manageable, but they're going to probably pick some from both, you know, if they're doing an assessment, because they're going to want to deal with, you know, the leadership and organization as a whole, as well as employees. Probably. So just a comment, but Mark, that I think aligns with what your thinking was.
Right, and I think there are questions that are in one domain, there's questions that are clearly in the other domain, and then there's these ones in the middle. And I think it could make a really rich assessment tool to have some of all three in there. And it's really just a question of, you know, how much is your organization tolerant of taking long surveys, and versus, you know, participation, because it's almost always, you know, there's that inverse, right? The longer, the more complicated survey, the fewer the responses. And so, you know, what we've actually done with some pretty good success, and you may have done this at your organization too, is we've actually run focus groups with employees, similar to what they do for marketing. And so we get a group that we think has a reasonable representation. We bring them together, and then we'll do this, you know, like an hour and a half with them, and ask them, you know, probe a little bit more on some of these questions to try and get to some of those things where you really do get commentary as well. And of course, you have to have a great facilitator for that, because you don't want to have a few voices kind of drowned out the rest of the room, which can sometimes happen. But yeah, I think this is really, really looking good, and I'm excited about putting this into a tool.
Makeda, I was wondering, you have you have spoken about change management and stuff, and you have also been involved in, development of all this. If your thoughts in sort of structuring this so it feeds naturally into the change management, so that we can get some information that would be useful input to the change management methodology, identifying where the snake bits are and so forth.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Makeda.
Okay, there it goes. Yeah, no, I think it's great to sort of assess the workforce. And like you said, I think oftentimes there is a disconnect between employee attitudes maybe in different divisions or departments, as well as a division between employee attitudes and leadership attitudes, or even union employee attitudes versus different types of attitudes. So it helps you assess that to sort of see if the survey data is consistent across the organization, or if there's specific sort of employee or leadership populations that may need a different sort of communication approach. So how do you tailor that to roll things out most effectively? And I really liked how you guys called out those questions that overlap between the workforce and organization. And I'm wondering how much of those questions that overlap address the organizational leadership piece. I wonder if that's that bucket, or I just think that's an interesting question. I love the idea of sort of labeling the questions in a way that people could parse out and sort of just say, I want to address employee issues today. I want to just address leadership issues today. So I don't know if that overlap is some of those leadership behaviors, but I'll take a look as well.
Okay, Alice, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I really like how the conversation is going. I'm not particularly concerned about making sure that organizational culture and workforce are separated clearly. I think that they're, the way you guys have gone with it and really sort of trying to pick out what elements of various topics, I guess you could call them, refer to each. And I'm wondering if that's kind of as more of a specific answer to Cello's question earlier about how do you not just give 5 questions and not give like 200 questions, that, more those topics that Kaysra and Parijat sort of came up with would be sort of master questions. Like, I think my organization is having problems with communication. And then once they click on that tab or whatever, however you call that, then you have like the 15 questions related to that. And so people could, start with just a few questions to know where they're going and then get into the deeper ones, so that we're not making the decision for them if they have 100 questions to answer or 3.
Yeah, and so I was thinking just on that lines that this could also be a resource which could be used more for pulse survey kind of a thing. Like Lisa mentioned that there is some issue that's happening with communication, or they addressed, some initiative that came in, and they can add a question or 2 and then have these used more as a pulse survey as well. That, and then one more point before I have a background noise. That utilities will have to, once they are identifying these questions, they will have to sort of keep these questions just to have trend over the course of years. It's not that they can make frequent changes if they want to see certain trend.
So you have the different categories, you have the layers, you also have, let's just say, front-end demographics that say, like what division are you in? Or do you have a supervisory or a leadership role? And so that you can basically break those out. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Lisa, I was just thinking ahead a little bit to your next meeting in a couple weeks, and it seemed what's happened is all the good work that they did in the past is actually not shown here, but it was part of the evolution, that wound up producing, the maturity model, the statements, the layers, the categories, the combination of things, and then the questions that are embedded, in an assessment. And Makeda, in order to deal with, change, we've shown the 5 you know, the aspirational goal, but
Mhm.
we would have to have, you know, what we've talked about is having some scale of 1 through 5, regardless of how we represent it, you know, in terms of category, you know, headings and content, so that you can basically do the assessment and see what is high versus low, and where the areas are to improve. I mean, Makeda, do you agree with that? In order to do the assessment that you're and identify what it is that you want to change, that you're going to have some, you know, kind of maturity level that's identified in the assessment.
Yeah, you have to sort of see what people's ability to change, you know, currently is. That's something you'll definitely want to assess. Yep. What's their ability? What have they already been doing? I think that.
You know, the other thing about with the survey question and the demographics really is years of service. Sometimes that tells you, you know, who is willing to change, right? Is it, you know, you're probably going to find maybe that people that have been there 25 years are like set in their ways and maybe feel they don't need to change and take on that extra burden, yet the young people that have been in there, you know, 2-3 years are just itching to change things as they see them.
At Metropolitan, they say you come to change the world and you stay for the benefits.
Yeah.
Yes, that is very accurate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Lisa, do you have some reactions? A lot is thrown at you here today.
Lots of reactions. I think thinking about the, you know, what are the good questions? A few good questions. And that's the key. And I do think what we've gotten in all the attributes or the characteristics come up with is a lot of variety, because there's been a lot of us contributed to it. And I think that's been key to it. So we probably need to fall on the variety of input for the questions as well, you know, so that we can decide which ones are the few that will capture it best for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a comment from Parijat whether we should sprinkle some change readiness questions and if they belong here. So that's a good, yeah. And from Makeda, she would look at the pro-sci change readiness assessment, and Dawn Uchiyama has sent us a document from California, state of California, that also has a section on readiness. I think I've posted that. If I haven't posted that already, I will. I think it's already posted to our knowledge base, the OneDrive, that you guys could all access it. Would it be helpful if I created a space that's accessible via Microsoft Teams, or you guys, or would you prefer to just have a folder in OneDrive? What would you prefer? It's actually the same thing. Okay, I'll do this. I'll do both, and then I'll just link it in Microsoft Teams. I'll just make a note.
Yeah, Makeda, can you, or is it okay for you to share the pro-sci change readiness assessment, or no?
That I'm not sure of. So I can look to see what their copyright is. I may be able to change it if you guys promise not to use it. But I'll take a look into their copyright around that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have access to. I also had the certification pro-sci, so I have the materials and all, but I was not sure what what I would be able to share. So the benefit of this California thing, it's not nearly as kind of slick, if you will, and complete as pro-sci. It has a different bent, but also when I was looking at it was very helpful, and Parijat pointed out that this Office of Personnel Management surveys, because they're non-proprietary, you can use them. Before that, I was looking at Gallup and all these other places. They're all proprietary, and they're all And I don't want to be like a, Gallup salesman and,
Yeah. Well, we could come up with a hybrid also. I know I sent something to Cello. We have the California, we have ProSci. We can come up with our own questions even if we want to. But I like the idea of including something in here about at least people's perceptions of their readiness for change, in connection with this. But we've also looked at readiness for change as part of the change process itself, which, for Dawn's group, where you'd almost start with that. If you've identified some let's say a team, a group, an area, a problem to address, then, let's do a readiness for change survey and get on the same page relative to that. So at least, I think Dawn was looking at this as a front end piece for change management as well. So.
Yeah.
Staying with that theme of for things to change, the leaders have to change and model the change first. So it seems like within the survey, we need to have a question that probes into the leader and what they're doing to develop themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if that's not happening, you can have all this great programs that won't really go anywhere. It's that you're back to the only 30% of transformation of organizations succeeds. So I really think if we can make sure that we put enough focus on the leader needing to be the first part that changes, and then the rest of that will benefit from that.
So maybe, Lisa, just thinking ahead to a couple of weeks, maybe it's like, here's been our journey. Here's a context, which you've kind of described a little bit here, that we have to keep in mind as we're doing maturity assessment and change. And then we go into, where are we? And, in terms of the work that's been done by the core team, and then get people's response, comments and feedback on that, something like that.
Makeda?
Oh, yeah, no, I was just typing in the chat. I think Alice, I really like Alice, your comment here about perceptions about whether leaders are willing to change. And to your point, Lisa, any change and development often gets stopped in its track at the leadership level. I don't know, what do you think there's space, or this would be appropriate to add questions or to align our questions, the measures of our questions to sort of perceptions about employee and leadership accountability, or is that, shaking the table too much?
I think that's key, because all the research tells us that people don't act on facts, they make decisions based on feelings. This is both on the individual level and the organizational level. So the perceptions, I think you hit absolutely. Without that, we don't have the full information.
Yeah, because I think also sometimes you see in organizations, you'll have some leaders willing to change and some leaders who aren't willing to change, and just, a small group of leaders can also undermine everything else, change effort. So absolutely. Yeah, and I think that the very encouraging thing is that we started with 400 comments and meetings and everything, but we are zeroing in on content that's really good.
So I have a quick, question, thought, if you don't mind. So when we talk about leadership and we talk about, staff, I see three, at least at a minimum, 3 levels. I see executive leadership, the middle management leadership, and then the staff. So at least since I've been, in the utility, coming from a private enterprise where I think that exists, but I think to a lower extent, there's more camaraderie between the executive but in the utilities, I find there's a bigger gap. And so if the executive leadership isn't even talking about change, the middlemen, you can survey them all you want. And if that direction isn't coming from there, they're not going to do it. And so the staff is like the last people at the bottom of the rung. So I don't know if part of this change management should be how impactful your executive leadership team is in pursuing change, because that will drive your middle managers and hopefully will drive the staff to a certain extent. I don't know if you've thought about that, or is that kind of too many layers?
I think I have to say that my technical background is really, a lot of it is in mathematical simulations and control systems, real-time control systems. And when I would approach a utility to see, and control system requires change. You have to bring in new technology, new processes. And so I've been hired by utilities to come in, usually they'd say, Cello, come in and tell us how to better use technology. So if I talk to somebody in the front lines, their attitude would be like this. These people downtown that sent you here, they don't have any idea what I do. So the only thing I need is and then they'll say the replacement for the software that they currently use, because they haven't had any other system before. So I just need a new version of whether it's SAP or Maximo or whatever it is that they're using. Then I come to their supervisor, right, or manager. And I said, well, what do you think? He said, I can see the need for my team to integrate, but I really don't think it's appropriate for my data to be accessed raw and without any judgment by others, because they don't understand what's really going on. So they really need to come to me so I can give them a proper interpretation. And the real thing, the problem in organization is that Bill over there, he doesn't let me look at his data. You see? And then I go to the top executive and his answer will be, Cello, these technology projects are always over budget. They always go much longer. They don't know what schedule means. And I can never get the information I need. And half the time these projects blow up in scope and budget. So the perceptions are very different. The desire for integration is very different. It's just like been like this in every utility that I've been to.
Mm-hmm.
So Kasra, I really liked what you said in terms of those three groups, and maybe if we just sort of conceptually take those three groups and say, what question or two or three would you include in a survey that would address them specifically? And they could actually be, if you were doing a survey, one is to self-declare, things. The other would be demographic wise, is to put people into one of those categories so that you can actually ask them that question and not everybody else if it doesn't pertain to them. I mean, that's a possibility, but I'm wondering as a to-do, if somebody wants to identify, what would be some change related questions for those three kinds of levels of staff.
Lisa has her hand up.
Yeah, if I can react both to Kasra and Cello's comments, trying to connect this back to the leaders then in their mindset. Now, this idea that they don't know what they're doing, they're just off someplace making decisions without knowing, what the folks that have to now implement it know. That comes back to a mindset for leaders about listening. So what's the traditional mindset of leaders is they've been valued for their decision-making and communication of decisions versus going out and getting input to help the process of a good decision getting made. So there's one example of a leader mindset that your role, your importance to this organization is not to make all these decisions the best you can in the vacuum of information, but to be a better listener. So I think there's a focus there in terms of here's a mindset connection, that it's important for you as a leader to recognize and reinforce a deep commitment to listening intently to others and not feeling you have to be the one that makes decisions quickly and, you know, get the job done that way.
I answered Alice's question in the chat, and I can I see that there's executive leadership, senior management, first line supervisors, and staff. And I'll tell you again my personal experience. Mark Pauling and I used to work at an agency that no longer exists, and they're pretty big. And I was eventually head of IT. I've never seen the executive director. Never. I didn't know what he looked like. I never in a meeting with him. Gibbs something or other, and later I became a consultant, and I was on a job in Philadelphia, and I was coming back. Philadelphia Water Department was my client. I was coming back to my hotel like 10:30, 11 at night, and they had a pipe break. So they had about 6 or 7 guys in hard hats and vests, and they had another person with them with a hard hat. That was the top guy at the Philadelphia Water Department. There was no flipping way in this universe that guy, executive director from Seattle, would ever be there at 11 o'clock at night talking to the guys who are fixing the pipe. So I thought, okay, this is the client I want to work for. So it's not that simple, but there is this connection between what the guys on the front line or people on the front line are doing and the people that are perceived at the top. It has tremendous impact on how they perceive the organization and their immediate supervisor, obviously. So that I think 4 levels are probably a little bit better. And somebody else had their hand up, I think, or no?
They did, yeah.
So I had used the change readiness that FAO, that's Food Agriculture Organization, UN, that addresses some of the questions there. And I don't think we would have issue using them because they would be open source kind of a thing. And I would share that with Cello and he can add to the drive.
This is amazing what Parijat does. Whenever I'm hitting my head against the wall with some problem, she says, well, I have already a solution from somewhere else. Like, oh, great.
No, because right here in KC Water, we come up with these issues as well that, we cannot use the copyright and stuff. So that's why I am on internet researching for all of them half of the time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I like your 4 categories, Cello. What do others agree with that?
Yeah, I think definitely something I learned moving to the utility space, that there is a really clear distinction people have between first line supervisors and management. I would be talking to foreman and they'd be complaining about management. I'm like, you are management, per the contracts. So I think that distinction would be really helpful for folks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They still don't think they're management, by the way. Absolutely not. Yeah.
So Lisa, in the time that we have, are we supposed to finish at the bottom of the hour here?
At 8:30, yeah. Or
yeah,
10.
maybe Lisa, what are your takeaways from this and how do you best see it being applied?
Well, as a listening leader, I'd like to ask the group what comes to mind for them as what a next step could look like. There's different levels of connection to the details, and I need to get my hands on that last spreadsheet because I love the buckets that it's falling into. But, it's like what seems to the group as a good next step would be the question I'd want to start with.
Can I answer that?
Anybody feel free. This is about getting a variety of input because I've started to live by the law that variety destroys variety, which means you get to the real heart of the matter.
So the thought was that Alice and Makeda and Keistra and Mark and Parijat have all been massaging this spreadsheet, and they've been massaging the truth out of all these 400 things and relevance. So I think we need a couple of more rounds of that and then maybe a little bit of a workshop with the core team to finalize it, and then a workshop to present it to the broader. And I would propose maybe Mark and Lisa, both that we have a workshop with both workshop and workforce. I mean the workforce and the organizational, both, that we get them both into a workshop, and that we present this and we hear their feedback. But right now we're sort of like making the sausage, so it's probably a little bit more effective and efficient to do it with a smaller core team. But then in maybe a couple of weeks, if we could think about having this go through a couple of iterations and then show it to both teams. What do you guys think?
And so during these follow-up meetings, we'd be sort of aligning the questions and measures to these external resources we've been discussing?
That, and also looking at how to, because KSRA and everybody's contributed a lot to making things more and more better and better organized. And so I think the structure that KSRA and Parijat, this last iteration, is really on the right track. So just to kind of continue along that track, fill out those different things, and have a discussion among the core team to get that sort of, you know, have like a version 1.0.
I think that would be, I was just going to say, it would be good then to get kind of a, here's a link now for, here's what we've accomplished to this point, review and comment, you know, there could be various stages along the way. So we can all keep connected to it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I already have that in my notes. That'll happen right after this call. I'll put it in both Microsoft Teams. It already is on OneDrive. I'll get it all in the right place. And KSRA has a hand up.
Yeah, so I was wondering if, you know, I know Parijat is still working on completing some of those tabs. And then Parijat, when you're done, if you, me, and Mark we can meet and sort of go over the org culture stuff, make sure we're comfortable the way we are seeing it. And then meanwhile, if Alice and Makeda can look at what, you know, because we don't have any, most of the questions that we have are in the org culture. We don't have any questions in the workforce portion. So if you can look at each tab and not only come up with the questions and stuff, but also, you know, keep a note of what are the things that you think what we've done should really belong someplace else, or, you know, and then maybe then we can all meet together one more time. And once you're done, your piece or culture is completed theirs, then we can come together and say, does this each tab make sense where it is? Or, you know, do we need to move things, shift things around? And then that way we'll at least have that document ready for Cello and Lisa to kind of look at and say, all right, these statements make sense, these questions make sense, and we can prepare a presentation for the larger teams.
And if you included what we talked about on the change management, kind of couple questions for each of those 4 groups, that might be useful as well. And Lisa, I don't know from a schedule standpoint whether, you know, exactly what KSRA said works, or whether you want to, you know, join a call with KSRA and Parijat, you know, next week, you know, say, or not, kind of up to you. Like Mark is, and Mark's.
If it would work, that'd be great. So, yeah, I will try and make sure my schedule can accommodate.
So if we want to look at us, I mean, if we're here, we can maybe look at what dates are available, and then we don't have to be pulling.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be great.
So I don't know, Lisa, Cello, what are you know.
Next Tuesday afternoon actually looks pretty good for me right now. If that would be probably the earliest in the week that I have open, if you're trying to focus sooner rather than later.
You didn't mean tomorrow, that's correct? You meant next,
Next Tuesday, the 16th. I thought I heard you say next week, but
yeah, Tuesday,
What time zone are you guys,
Yeah,
do we want to use as a base?
I know. So Tuesday afternoon, I mean, for me, 2:30 Eastern time works.
Okay, I'm free after 3 Eastern time next Tuesday.
how about 3? Is 3 okay as well, Makeda, or after 3?
3 is okay. Yep.
Yeah,
Eastern.
and
Yep.
I've got I have a 3 to 4. Otherwise, I am completely open on Tuesday the 16th.
Okay, I could
So
do-
Wednesday afternoon, I'm totally open if anyone Wednesday afternoon is available.
So
Okay.
how about Wednesday at 3?
I have a 3 to 3:30 on Wednesday, but I'm free any other time. I could also do 4 on Tuesday afternoon.
Is 4 too late for you, Mark?
No,
So
Okay,
that might work on Tuesday at 4 Eastern, right?
Mhm.
Which would be
Eastern, right?
3 Central and 1 o'clock
Pacific.
Pacific.
so this is, I'm sorry, is it Tuesday at 4 o'clock? Is that it?
I might join a little late. That's the time I have to go pick up my son. Sorry.
Okay. So how about 4:15? What would 4:15 help? Or
3:30 would be. So
You-
that would be 4:30 Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
okay, is that too late for the people on the East Coast?
No.
No,
works for me in the Midwest.
Okay, and how long should I set it? 60 minutes?
yeah,
Okay, I'll set it for an hour and a half just in case, but we'll count on having an hour. Or should I just set it for an hour?
I mean, I would set it for an hour if we can get done sooner, great, but at least no one can, I'd rather not have someone take the time slot and then our meeting gets longer, so.
Yeah,
Khosrow,
No one can overbook me.
yeah, Khosrow, you have your hand up.
Oh, no, that's from before, sorry.
All right, I think we've got a plan for next steps. Good discussion today. Scott, Cello, anything else that we wanted to make sure we got on the table before we let everybody go off to their busy weeks?
no, let me just make sure that I got everybody. I think I have everybody now on the invite. I will send the invite shortly. And many thanks to everybody for participating. Parijat and Kesra working over the weekend. I don't know, man, I'm gonna have to be baking some serious cookies here one day.
Thanks,
All
everybody.
right.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
I'll
you.
send you my address, Cello, so you can mail those cookies.
Okay, yeah, send me your address, everybody. Send me your address and I'll mail them, okay?
all right,
I mean it, I mean it.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.